we began a new series called Life Swap, and many of you have seen this little card that we have been sharing with others. And we're looking at some things that we would like to swap out of our life. And this morning, as we look at this whole text, we are looking at the theme of what it means to get even. Sometimes we want to get even when things have been done against us. So many people use another expression: I don't get mad, I get even. Well, I'm not sure that's exactly true. That a lot of people really get very mad, and in their anger, they want to get even. And in this whole process, they lose self-control. You don't have to raise your hand, and don't nudge anybody. But have you ever lost it? And you have just gone ballistic over certain situations or circumstances that might have actually taken place. For a lot of us, there are times when we have become very angry about situations that happen in life. And it probably is one of the most misunderstood and misapplied emotions that we have as human beings. When we lose control, when we lose self-control, very often later on when we think about it and reflect upon the situation that has happened, we live with a lot of regrets. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did I press that send button on my computer? Some people think I should never get angry, that it is a sin. Well, that's not necessarily true. Sometimes anger is an appropriate response to situations and circumstances that actually take place in life. There are times when the Bible says that God has become angry. Often when he sees injustices that exist around the world, his anger is raised. When there is false worship, God's anger is evident. The problem for us is not having anger. The problem is, how do I adequately and biblically express the anger that I'm actually feeling? Because anger is simply an emotion that arises within us. Some people have suggested that there are two categories of people. I think there's more, but for the sake of time, we're going to look at two. They're both extreme ends. Maybe you fit into one of them, maybe you don't. Somewhere in the middle might be for you. But some people could be described as a turtle. In other words, when conflict arises, what do? I withdraw. I pull in my head, I pull in my appendages, and I try to just stay out of the situation. So there might be some people who are like a turtle, but there could be other people who are like a skunk. And a skunk, as you know, can stink the place out. And sometimes we spew our anger everywhere. Now, I know those are two extremes, but think about it for a few moments. In Proverbs, the PowerPoint died, so I don't need to hold this for the rest of the morning. So I'm going to read it to you. That's why I carry PowerPoint notes. In Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 11, we read this: a fool gives vent to their anger, but a wise person keeps their anger under self-control. So if we are just ventilating here, there, and everywhere, God says that's foolish. And a fool is described as a person without common sense reasoning or ability. Here are a couple of facts about anger. I'm just going to give you three. The average woman, so if you're average, you lose your temper about 3 times a day. Week. Some people of the other gender sitting beside you are thinking, is that all? If you are a man, it's about 6 times a week. Very often, women are angry toward other people, and men are often angry against objects. You ever see a guy getting out there, he's so mad, he kicks the tire, and then he has to go to the hospital and get a cast on his foot? because sometimes we don't know what we're doing. And so we got to find ways that are going to be helpful for us to express our anger. So when we get angry, you need to understand that there are 3 root causes for anger. So anger is just an emotion that arises within us, but there are 3 essential things that cause it to happen. The first one is, I have been hurt. It could be I am hurt physically, could be hurt emotionally. So if you're out there doing some carpentry this weekend and you have a hammer and a nail and you miss the one nail and get the other nail, you're often pretty mad, and it can be expressed in a variety of ways. So sometimes I'm hurt physically. The second cause for anger is frustration. You're trying to reach a goal, and there are objects in your way that prevent you from actually attaining it. So let's imagine that you have an appointment that is really essential, and you're driving down the road, and there is a driver in front of you who is enjoying the country scenery, and you can't get by because you're going about 25 kilometers under the limit. And you have an appointment, and you're going to be late if he or she doesn't get out of your way. And you start to get angry. Just think of what road rage has done in extreme situations. And the third cause of anger is I am afraid. If I feel threatened, if I feel trapped, my whole physiological system kicks in, the adrenaline is pumping, and often I express it even through anger. Now, in the Old Testament story that was read this morning, and that's a longer story, it's in 1 Samuel chapter 25, David has been anointed to be the next king of Israel, but Saul is still on the throne. And Saul is threatened by David, even though David has proven to be absolutely loyal to him. And so in his feelings of fear that David's going to take over the throne, Saul is trying to take his life. And so David is in a place of hiding. While he is there, 600 men have gathered around him, and he is responsible for looking after these individuals. So what are they going to do? What will be their source of income? What happened was they offered their services of protecting shepherds of large flocks. Now, in that day, there was no local police service. There was no border security. There were tribes and villages, and often some of the tribes or different villages would prey on weaker ones and take all of their produce, take all of their livestock, and sometimes just take everything that they owned. And so you wanted to have some form of protection. And David and his men were providing protection to the shepherds of this man whose name was Nabal. So in many ways, they were like the local neighborhood watch that we are familiar with today. Now the custom was that at the end of the season, when the sheep were going to be sheared and the wool would be then used and sold and bartered, there would be some goods set aside by the owner as a way of saying thank you to these men who had provided protection. It was a very common practice in that day, and everybody did it. Now, there was no law saying you must provide for these people who have given you protection. It was just simply a way of showing thanks and gratitude to these individuals. So this one man that we read about this morning, his name was Nabal. Now it's interesting, his name actually means fool. He's a very wealthy guy, but we're going to see as he lives out his life, he really is quite foolish. And his men told him that David and his 600 men had provided protection for them. And actually, there is a picture that is painted by the men about David. And here's what they say. The men were very good to us. They never mistreated us. And nothing was ever missing. Night and day, they were like a wall that was surrounding us. So they were a great source of protection. And so in this situation, David needed to provide for his men. So out of the 600, he sent 10, and he said, go to Nabal and present a request. And the request is very simple. Say to him, long life to you, good health, and to your household. This is the time of sheep shearing. When your shepherds were with us, we never mistreated them. Nothing was ever taken from them. Therefore, would you please show favor towards David and his servants? Now that's a pretty open request. It is done very gently. It is very respectful. And Nabal hears it. He hears what these 10 men have to say to him, and this is what he says in response. Who is this David, this son of Jesse? A lot of servants are breaking away from their masters these days. So why should I take my goods and give it to these men who come from who knows where? The request of David's men is completely rejected. In fact, Nabal goes even further, and he makes all kinds of statements like, I don't even know who David is. David was a well-known figure in Israel. People had sung his praises. He had led the army of Saul. He had defeated the giant Goliath. His name had spread like wildfire, and everyone knew about it. And Nabal says, so who's this guy? Who does he think that he actually is? The son of Jesse? Never heard of him. Now, it's one thing to refuse to share what you have, but it's another thing to treat the person who has made the request like dirt, to treat them like a nobody. So think back. Remember, there were 3 causes for anger. Here are 2 of them: hurt and frustration. And David reacts. What does he say? He says to his men, strap on your swords. That's like saying, lock and load, we're going to town. So for David, when he hears this, it's a knee-jerk reaction, and he responds. And he says, Nabal is marked for death. So he leaves 200 men back at the ranch, and he takes 400 into town, where he's going to exact his revenge on this man Nabal. Isn't it amazing what people will do when they get angry? When people start to lose self-control in their life, we need to understand that when we lose self-control, we are losing our identity as a child of God, because we will often act in ways that are very destructive towards other people. So here are 3 proverbs that talk about hot tempers. In Proverbs 15, hot tempers cause arguments. Would you agree? Anger causes mistakes. I think so. But look at this one. People with hot tempers do foolish things. So here's the point. I always lose when I lose self-control. I always lose when I lose self-control. So this morning there are 3 simple principles I would like to leave with you from this story. The first principle is this: we need to learn to reflect before we react. The Bible tells us it is absolutely foolish to respond impulsively to anything. And David needed to learn that lesson. So on the way to Nabal, he encounters a beautiful, intelligent woman. Her name is Abigail. Abigail is the wife of this fool called Nabal. And she has heard the story of what Nabal said to David's men, and she realizes that David is going to react. David is coming to town, and in the words of the Westerns, there's going to be a shootout, at the OK Corral. It's going to happen. Have you ever noticed that there are times in our lives when God intervenes by special graced people? God brings special people into our lives and intervenes on our behalf. For David, that was Abigail. She sees David and she pleads with him not to act in the manner that he was intending to act, which was to destroy every male associated with Nabal. What is the basis of her plea? She says to him these words, remember who you are. Isn't that significant? Remember who you are. She's saying to him, don't fight grudge battles. Take your battles before God and let him deal with it. Because she is aware of two things. She is aware of the mean-spirited nature of her husband. But she is also aware of David's intention to do evil. And she's saying to David, I want you to trust God. And she reminds him, God does protect. God does intervene. You have seen this in your life over and over again. And she talks about even the fact that God has slain his enemies with the sling, a reminder of what happened when he confronted Goliath. So here is the proverb that she reminds him of. A stupid person. Now I know in some of your homes, children are not supposed to use the word stupid, right? I mean, Joel has said that about his house. But listen, it's in the Bible. And in some cases, that's the only word that describes some people. Where was I? Oh, yeah. A stupid person gives free rein in their anger. A wise person waits and let it grow cool. You know, there is wisdom in the old proverb, count to 10, which just means step back from the situation. Let things cool down before you actually are going to deal with the situation at hand. And David considers what Abigail has said, and he recognizes that this is the hand of God. This woman has spoken in such a way that God is using her to intervene in his life. And this is what he says to her. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hands. Abigail, you have done an amazing thing in my life. So the next day she goes home, and her husband's he's having a time of his life. He is partying it up, and he is 3 sheets to the wind. So she doesn't tell him anything. The next day, when he is sobered up, she tells him that she gave all of this food, and you saw how much it was, enough to feed 600 men. Well, his reaction is that he became like a stone. Another way of saying it is, he had a massive stroke. His blood pressure must have escalated. And he survived for 10 days, and he died. Judgment fell on this man. Principle number 1 is reflect before you react. The second principle is this: release your anger appropriately. There is a place for anger. When God sees child abuse, when he sees racial prejudice, when he sees the poor being ripped off, when he sees worship of other gods, he responds to that. So anger is not wrong. I need to find ways to express it properly. Now, some people just repress it. They say, I never get angry. Other people suppress it. They just keep pushing it down and down until something is like a trigger, and then they explode. You're going, really? Over all that? And then there are some who are expressors. Some express it immediately. They just let it out. But there are healthy ways of expressing it. Because if I don't express it rightly, further problems will come my way. So how are we to express it? Listen to these words from Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer quiets anger, but a harsh one stirs it up. Have you ever noticed that? If you become gentle in your response, the other person who is going at you doesn't know how to respond. But if I respond with all of the vigor and venom that I can raise within myself, it just becomes like a snowball that is rolling down the hill. So I deal with it. I speak about it. And perhaps sometimes it's really good, before I even speak to that person, that I rehearse it before God to say, this is what I need to say, because I want to speak carefully to the other. Decisions that are made in anger can be disastrous. And very often, a quick temper is a sign of immaturity in my own life. You know, the Bible says you should never appoint leaders in the church if this is their problem. In Titus 1, verse 7, it says, do not appoint those in the church who are quick-tempered and given to lack of self-control. The third thing is this: I need to rely upon God for his help. Your relationship with Jesus and my relationship with Jesus is really significant. Because the closer I get with him, it enables me to discover his gifts of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit that will become manifested in my life. If we're on the fringe of our relationship with Jesus and we're not keeping it alive and dynamic day by day, we often find ourselves in more difficult situations because I am not relying upon him to help me to deal with these circumstances that I face every day. One of the fruits of the Spirit is called self-control. And as I surrender my life more and more to Jesus, and I realize I might be struggling in this area, I ask him, enable me, O God, to be more in control. So here's what we need. The prophet Ezekiel put it in these words. God says, I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit in you. I'll remove the stone heart from your body and replace it with a heart that is God-willed and not self-willed. Isn't that amazing? Some people say, it doesn't bother me. If that's you, you got a heart of stone. Our relationships with people are so important. And saying, God, give me a new heart. Give me a new spirit. I want a spirit and a heart that is focused on what you want and not what I want. Sometimes we have to let some things go. David was angry and he wanted revenge. And yet when this young woman entered into his life, he was eternally grateful for her act of intervention. And by his own conclusion, he knew that if he had sought revenge, it would have been a terrible sin. Here's what we live with. One day, God will settle all accounts. We are told this. And the direction for us comes from Paul's letter to the church in Rome. And he said to these Christians, as he says to us today, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. What would you like to swap out of your life today? Have there been times when you've been hurt, treated unjustly, unfairly? You want to react? Maybe, God, you can say, will you take away my reaction and help me to be a person with self-control? That I will walk in your ways. I will follow your principles and your precepts because I want to live before the face of God today and in my tomorrows. Let's pray together.